and welcome to Good Grief, the podcast dedicated to demystifying and destigmatizing grief with compassion and humor. I'm Nikki. I'm an end-of-life doula and a grief coach in Columbus, Ohio. And today, we are going to have a lovely conversation with one of my good personal friends, Stephanie Linn. Stephanie is a coach for highly sensitive people. She hosts workshops, does one-on-one coaching, and is just the all-over guru for highly sensitive people, like myself, and maybe some of you too. We get into a whole lot about processing our emotions, loss, grief, and just all the big feels that highly sensitive people get to enjoy. So if you're an HSP, don't turn away from this one. Let's dive into it. But before we get into the episode, you can support me over on Patreon. If you go to patreon.com/Nikki the Death Doula, you can support me there. All of the money I receive from my Patreon goes to a fund so that I can provide pro bono work to those who cannot afford my services. For as little as $1 a month, you can get grief affirmations in your inbox and some other bonus content. And at higher tiers, you get early access to my podcast and Q&As and updates and all sorts of other great stuff. And no matter what tier you come in at, I'll give you a shout out here on the podcast. So little as $1 a month, you can hear me say your name right here. I don't know if that's appealing, but I don't know. When I listen to podcasts, if they say my name, I get a little excited. So anyway, enough of that. You're not here to listen to me talk about my Patreon, although I would love to have your support. Patreon.com/Nikki the Death Doula. It's been a year, you guys. It has been a year. But that's another podcast for another day. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Stephanie. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in this week. I have another amazing guest episode. I am super excited to have my lovely, dear friend, Miss Stephanie Linn. Stephanie, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. I'm just going to go ahead and give you a second to introduce yourself, tell my listeners who you are, what you do, and why you're here.
Thank you, Nikki. It is such a pleasure to be here. I love your podcast because it's the perfect mix of humor and depth. So I feel very lucky that I get to be here with you.
Yay.
And hello, my name is Stephanie Linn, and I am a highly sensitive person coach. Highly sensitive people are the 20% of the population whose bodies, minds, and emotions are more sensitive, more intense than other people. So if you are one of those people who's picking up on other people's emotions, or you are very sensitive to light or temperature or texture, these could be signs that you're a highly sensitive person.
Yay. Awesome. Thank you. And thank you for what you do. As a highly sensitive person myself, it's nice to know I'm not alone. And I've actually learned more about myself just from listening to you talk and your show and everything, because there's so much about myself I didn't realize it was because I was highly sensitive, like the noise and light thing. I have meltdowns in grocery stores because of the lighting and the noise and the quantity and it's everything. It's overwhelming. So
yeah, and you probably felt like you were the only weirdo that was having all of these problems because other people are like, what are you talking about? There's no noise. There's no weird lights. What do
it's
you
just a
mean?
grocery store. What's your problem? And then
Yes, and you can't not see it.
yeah, it's like, what's my problem? It's everything. Such stupid side story. One of my friends was like, you have to go to, it's Jungle Gyms, I think, down in Cincinnati. Have you ever been there? I was
I've
like,
heard of it, but
okay.
I've never been.
It was, I mean, it was fun because it was so quirky, but I'm like, this is too much. Because she was like, they have a whole aisle of just hot sauce. I'm like, I can't handle this decision. This is too much. I gotta go. I could not tolerate being in there. So anyway, stupid side story.
Hashtag
So
highly sensitive person problems.
yeah, I do. And I'm of that generation, of that age, I guess. I was taught growing up like that I was weird because of it, right? And that's not how normal people act. And I'm too sensitive and I need to get over it. I'm using a lot of air quotes for my people who are just listening. Uh, so I'm assuming you've worked with people that have heard that a lot too.
Those are phrases that every single client has heard at some point or another.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Like, and yeah, it's hard to come back to that. And like, I was a child and that's just what I was told. I'm like, well, I guess I am too sensitive. Maybe there's something wrong with me. Yeah. Anyway, we could pick that apart all day.
Or
So
even
what?
if you didn't get explicit messages from people, sometimes you just pick up on those vibes from
Yeah.
others that
Yeah.
they're looking at you weird, or you
Mhm.
try to have a conversation and they steer it in a different direction. And you're like, huh, I wonder why that didn't go over. So you just
Yeah,
learn not to bring those up again, I guess,
I guess.
until you talk to other highly sensitive people. And then they're like, oh my God, yes.
And honestly, like, I feel like that's a benefit to what I do for a living because I know how to pick up on emotions. And the one thing that bothers me the most is when somebody, especially if they're no longer communicative while they're dying, and I can tell that there's stuff going on around them that is upsetting them, and nobody else can really see that. But I'm like, I know they're not happy right now. Everybody needs to get out of this room. And to be able to pick up on that, or even if they are communicative, but they just don't want to advocate for themselves, to have me in, which is weird being the person I have trouble advocating for myself, but damn if I won't do it for somebody else.
Isn't it funny how that happens? We're so
Mhm.
good at championing other people, but we have to learn how to do it for us.
Yeah, 100%. So what brought you into this line of work? Like what spoke to you about this?
I discovered I was a highly sensitive person about 10 years ago because I was friends with another highly sensitive person. And she said, I just heard about this thing and it really resonated with me. And she was describing it. And we had both determined that we'd had the same experience. Neither one of us had really done anything crazy when we were kids or teenagers. Like we'd never had rebellious stages like the rest of the kids in our classes had because we were already taking in so much information and everything was so intense and our worldview was so vibrant that it just didn't feel like we need to sneak out and drink or go to parties or anything in order to have a good time. It was much more interesting to have great conversations with people. It was much more interesting to connect on a deep level and to share stupid little inside jokes or to have experiences together. And it was so exciting to recognize that there was another person who experienced the world the same way as me. And it just felt like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. There's a word for people like us.
Yeah, yeah. And thank you for bringing that up because that's always been one of those things I've noticed, like growing up or in my young 20s, teens, whatever, everybody's like wanted to do the big parties. And I'm just like, I'd rather just kind of hang out and play games or, do something quieter. So I totally respect that. My husband, total opposite. It's opposite of me very much. I feel like we tend to draw more extroverted people. So.
We're a good balance for them. Yes.
Exactly. And he even says he appreciates it. Sometimes I get him to calm it down a little bit when he needs to. And he gets me out of my shell when I need to get out of my shell. So nice little
Hmm.
compliment to each other. So um if you I had a question right here and it kind of floated off this way, so I'm gonna look for it. Okay. If you if you were speaking with a brand new client, what's one of the first things you would ensure, not ensure, you would tell them to reassure, I think is the word I'm looking for, that they're okay and that, being a highly sensitive person isn't the bad thing that it's made out to be.
Usually, the first conversation I have, because people will come to me and they're like, some of this sounds like me, but some of it doesn't sound like me. And they'll tell me about what resonates or what doesn't resonate. And then I'll kind of explain, well, that could be an aspect of this emotional empathy, or this could be a part of overthinking things and ruminating on things, or this could be part of an anxiety that tends to come up when you have high sensitivity and you're
Mhm.
not managing your emotions, or you don't know how to control your environment to support your sensitivity. And then they'll say, oh, that makes a lot of sense. So a lot of times it's just translating highly sensitive people's experience of the world into this is what's kind of typical of other people, and here's where you differ, and here's how it's totally normal. And there are 1.6 other billion people who have the same thing going on.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's one of the things I love about things I hear from my listeners with this podcast is just how many people have experienced something with a grief or a loss, and they're like, I'm crazy. I must be going crazy because I'm thinking X, Y, and Z, or I'm doing X, Y, and Z. Nobody else has ever thought this. Nobody else has ever felt this. And to look at them and say, oh no, I can personally name, I'm not going to, but I can name 4 other people right now that have said that exact same thing. And we just don't talk about it enough for us to understand that, yeah, there are other people like that. So are you finding, I'm finding more and more that people are getting more open about talking about all the ickiness with not just grief, but our emotions and how we view the world and how we fit into it. Are you noticing that as well with highly sensitive folks?
Actually, I noticed the opposite, which always makes me laugh because with highly sensitive people, oftentimes we are so excitable about our emotions. Our emotions are very intense. And so for many HSPs, that can turn into overwhelm. And so many highly sensitive people teach themselves not to feel their emotions and not to express their emotions so that they don't have to be uncomfortable and overwhelmed.
I'm literally having like a oh God moment right now as you're saying that, because that's wow, I've experienced that personally. And like I've told this story several times on this podcast. When my brother passed away in 2015, I never processed that grief. At least not in the immediate, because I immediately was in the mode of my grief isn't important because his parent, my parents lost a son, his children lost a father. I'm just the sister. All these other people suffer this loss. I need to support them. And then when I started feeling the inklings of grief, I didn't like it. So I pushed it down. I'm real good at avoiding those uncomfortable things. So yeah, I pushed it down and it stayed down there too long and it exploded in a very bad mental breakdown in 2019. I did not do well for a while. So, oof.
Yeah, that's a really common experience, especially with grief and with the many iterations underneath the umbrella of grief.
Hmm.
So, one of the first things that I do with my highly sensitive clients is to help them feel their emotions and actually feel the sensations and to make peace with those things and to build up their capacity to hold emotions in their bodies and in their minds without freaking out and trying to distract themselves or avoid it and run away.
Yeah.
So the experience you're describing, especially, I'm just blank.
Hmm.
We tend to negate our place and to prioritize other people because we care and we want to help other people feel better. And we can see so easily how to help other people feel better that it just feels easier to move towards them than to take care of ourselves.
Hmm.
And so there's an unraveling process that I teach my clients about how to stop intellectualizing your emotions and talking about them, but not feeling them or expressing them. Because even though your emotions as a highly sensitive person are more, I don't want to say extreme, but they are more intense and they
Yeah.
can feel bigger than the average person who probably gets over them faster.
Hmm.
It's still worthwhile to be able to feel them, even when it feels scary.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something I have to work on with so many of my clients who might not even necessarily be a highly sensitive person, but just reminding them that it's not only okay, but you have to feel your feelings. Um, I would say you have to feel it to heal it, and you're not going to heal until you start actually recognizing these emotions. And it's hard. It's hard. It's because it's uncomfortable and it sucks. Nobody likes to be sad. Nobody likes to be angry. Nobody likes to feel the quote unquote bad feelings, which there are no good or bad. They're just feelings. And reminding people of that too is huge. So, have you ever worked with somebody to help them work through grief?
Grief has not been a topic that I have directly dealt with, meaning I haven't had a client come to me and say, I would like help dealing with my grief as a
Okay.
highly sensitive person. However, I have had people who have experienced life transitions that triggered grief for them. and they didn't necessarily know that that was what was happening.
Yeah.
Just as you said,
Mhm.
they thought it was, oh, well, I'm just struggling to figure out my next path. They're very action oriented. So they're like, I just need a new plan, or I just need to figure out what my next step is, or I just need a new goal. And they're bypassing the actual emotional experience of grieving the end of one part of their life and moving
Yep.
into the next chapter completely fresh.
Yeah, thank you. And I say that constantly on the shows. There are so many different types of grief. It's not necessarily somebody died. It's life transitions. Like I fully admit I'm going through a whole lot right now. I'm in premenopause and it's awful. And there's a lot of grief involved in that because my body isn't the same body it was even 5 years ago. And that's hard to adapt to. And you hear so much, and that's menopause is another one of those things people don't talk about, right? Because it's so stigmatized and like, oh, we just whisper that and close doors. No, we only talk about it because it sucks and it's okay for it to suck, but we need to understand that it's also a loss of one form or another. So anyway,
And literally every aging woman will go through it. Your
yeah,
hormones will change, your
yeah,
cycle will change.
yeah, yeah. And
It's
I've
big.
had Yeah, and I've known a few people who are cancer survivors and they had to have a total hysterectomy and they were forced into menopause at a very young age, and that's a shock. And that's a grief too. Like, and even just taking the fertility aspect out of it, just like I said, the changes to your body are, and so many people don't understand that. Like when you have a drastic change physically to yourself, for health or whatever reasons, that can be that's absolutely a grief. I used to be able to run 2 miles without batting an eye, and now like I might make it to the end of the block before I pass out. Ah. So have you had any of your own personal experiences with loss that you would be comfortable sharing?
Yes. And I'm glad that you brought up that grief doesn't necessarily have to be related to a loss in regards to death,
Mhm.
because sometimes an ending and a loss is the end of a relationship, or as you said, it's a change in your health status. It could be a change in your career. So for me, especially as a highly sensitive person, I really value my relationships, and the connections that I have are very important to me. So I've had a few best friend breakups over the
Oh,
years. Yes,
oh, those
that
are the worst. I've been
they
through those too.
Yes, they really hit you hard. And I think that our culture tends to prioritize romantic relationships.
Mhm.
And so there's an aspect of dating someone and the relationship doesn't work out and it ends, and everybody's like, well, just get back on the horse and get back out there. And everybody has more experience with romantic relationships. And so there's lots of platitudes and lots of pithy
Yeah.
advice that doesn't necessarily acknowledge what the person's going through. But
Yeah.
not a lot of people acknowledge changes in family structures or friendships, or
Hmm.
even when you change jobs. Maybe you were friends with people that you worked with and now they're not part of your life anymore.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of loss related to relationships just in that natural ebb and flow of your life.
Hmm. Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up. That's one thing I haven't really covered on this show is like friend breakups. And in some ways, I feel like those are almost more devastating because your friends see you differently than your romantic, not always, but your friends tend to see you in a different way than your romantic partners do, and those are very different relationships. And sometimes there's a lot more vulnerability with that.
Yeah.
Um,
And I'm a relationship anarchist. So I don't think that your romantic partner should have the top tier priority in your life.
I totally
And
agree.
yeah, because there are so many people who add so many beautiful aspects to your life. And I don't think it's your partner, your romantic partner's job to fulfill all your needs for you.
Yeah.
And the friend that I mentioned who brought up high sensitivity to me in the first place, we had a huge friend breakup and we've been friends, best friends for almost a decade. And it felt, because I think you could be soulmates with pets, I think you can be soulmates with friends. Oh my gosh, it was a huge loss for me. And it felt like it came out of left field. And dealing with grief through that process and looking back on it in hindsight, I thought, oh, there were some indications that this was going in a different direction and we were growing apart. And I can see it much more neutrally now. But it was so painful at the
Yeah.
time. I mean, she'd been with me through so many huge life events and like big celebrations and really low points, and we'd been there for each other.
Mhm.
And it was really tough. And then it happened again with other friends that had come in from particular experiences. Like I had a best friend that had been traveling abroad with me, and we had this magical experience when we were abroad. And then we came home, and the relationship just wasn't sustainable outside of that environment.
Yeah.
And it was rough. And I think there's so much more grace for grief with romantic relationships
Yeah.
and with familial relationships, but I have been hit really hard with friend breakups.
Yeah.
And it's been quite the journey to be able to process through who is that person? Who am I? And to see them as human, instead of to split them and to say, well, they were great when we were friends and now they're horrible and they're this huge
Yeah.
villain. And to just be able to acknowledge our own humanity and their humanity and where they were coming
Yeah.
from too.
Yeah. Yeah. And something you said there, like I was thinking that as you were talking too, when somebody goes through a breakup, it's so easy to be like, oh, you're too good for them, or you'll find somebody else. When somebody loses a friend, it's like nobody has anything to say to that. But also, it's not even like you talk about it. You don't call your other friend and be like, oh, maybe you do. I don't know. But like, oh, so and so isn't talking to me anymore. We're not friends anymore. Like, how do you even tell people that, without sounding weird, I guess. That, because it's not something we do, unless it's a huge like drama within a friend circle, then yeah, that can bleed out for sure.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think it has to do with the value that people place on friendships,
Hmm.
because I think sometimes we take them for granted that
Yeah.
our friends are there to support us. They are sometimes our shoulder to cry on when we don't feel like we can be vulnerable with other people. And yet, if that relationship ends or if it changes, it's almost like some people have a hierarchy in their minds of how important relationships are supposed to be or which type you should prioritize.
Yeah.
So I think you're totally right that friendships they get like bottom billing as far
Yeah.
as your priority in your life, even
Yeah.
though they can be extremely impactful.
Yeah. I also feel like maybe even slightly underbilled from under friends would be coworkers. And
Mm-hmm.
before I started doing what I do full time, I was at the same job for 16 years. There were only a couple people that were there that entire time with me, but there were people I worked with for 7, 8 years that I became really good friends with. And then I don't see them anymore. And you know how it is. You don't see them every day, so you stop talking to each other. So heck, if I know what's going on. And that's been hard. It's been kind of hard because now I'm here with my cat as my coworker.
And cats are very lazy coworkers.
Oh,
They
he's the
never make the
worst.
coffee.
I need to talk to HR too about his inappropriate touching because he likes to stand on my boobs. We need to have a conversation. I'm being harassed in the workplace.
I
Um,
know there's a cat pun there, but I just can't find it right now. We'll have to come back to it.
we'll circle back to that one. Oh my
Yes.
gosh. Well, thank you for bringing up marginalized relationships. And I just feel like there are so many types of relationships that we don't recognize as a society and therefore don't talk about. So when those relationships end, and it doesn't have to be like coworkers, friends, um, polyamory relationships, like there's same-sex relationships for the longest time were viewed as disenfranchised grief because that wasn't recognized. And now, thankfully, we're starting to come out of that. We're starting to talk about it a little bit more. Um, if someone were to suffer a loss that is a highly sensitive person, if you could give them just one bit of advice without giving away all your secrets, what would that what would that piece of advice be?
I know it's cliche, but the way to the other side of grief is through. You have to be willing to face your highly sensitive emotions. And yes, they feel big. And yes, you might feel a little flooded at times, but it is powerful to be able to get through to the other side. And the more support you can find to help you get through those experiences, the better off you're going to be.
See, and this is why you and I get along so well. You say everything I would say too. You have to go through it, and feeling those emotions is so hard. And it's hard enough for non-sensitive people, right?
Mhm.
I don't want to say normal, that's not the right word, but the non-sensitive, non-highly sensitive folks out there, I've dealt with have just a harder time, you know, dealing with that because nobody, whether you're sensitive or not, nobody wants to face those icky feels. It's hard. It sucks. It hurts.
Yes. And especially, I think a lot of highly sensitive people, because we're so thoughtful, we think we can outthink our way to the other side. Like, if I just work on some self-development, or if I just listen to some more podcasts, or if I just read some more books, then I can like outsmart myself and I'll just get to the other side. And then I can avoid that messy, uncomfortable, icky
Yeah.
part in the middle.
Yeah.
And there's no getting through that part without getting through that part. You have to just get
Yep.
messy and uncomfortable.
Yeah. And that's honestly, I've had a couple people I've had just like introductory calls with that want to hire me as a grief coach. And when I have to break that news to them that one, you're never going to get over your grief. It's always going to be there, but it will get better. But B, I'm not going to give you a cheat code to get around it. We're going to
Yes.
work through it. And I've had a couple people never call me back. So, because
They want you to be their game genie, and you're like, I'm sorry, I can't carry it for you.
they do. They want me to either just take their grief and hold it in my own heart, which I'm not going to do, or give them a way around it. And I'm like, that's not how it works, pumpkin. I'm so sorry. But you also have to be ready. If you're not ready to do the work, and that's okay. I've absolutely dealt with people. I'm like, your grief is too fresh. Let's come back in a couple months. You're not ready yet, and let's wait till you are. So that's perfectly okay to not be ready.
Mhm. I love that you have that experience, that you can sense that from people. And I'm sure your high sensitivity contributes to that too, that you can pick up on those subtleties that you might not necessarily be able to describe or to be able to justify, quote unquote.
Yeah.
But you can tell if someone's at a place where they're ready for it or if they're
Mhm.
just desperate to be through it.
Yeah. Yeah, I can usually pick up on that in the first call. Um, and I have had people that I'm like, I'm not sure you're ready, but they're adamant and I work with them and it takes a minute to crack them. Not crack them, but get in there and make them really kind of see what they have to do to work through their grief. And they're like, oh crap. This is gonna suck.
Hmm.
I'm like, yeah, it is. But that's why I'm here to help hold your hand through the process. So, all right.
Hmm. There's
So,
one other thing I want to say though,
yes,
because I
please.
I loved what you said about disenfranchised and marginalized grief,
Hmm.
because I have been extremely fortunate that no one close to me has died. And I've had elderly relatives who have passed at ripe old ages, and
Hmm.
it just made sense. It had that sense of closure that's very easy when you feel like someone has lived a full life.
Yeah.
But so much of my grief, especially as a highly sensitive person, because I feel deeply and I care about lots of people, I have had grief over a cat dying unexpectedly.
Oh my
And
God.
yes, she was 2, and we have no idea what
No.
happened.
Oh.
It just was super sudden. She was there one minute, gone the next, and they
Mhm.
never found out what caused it. And we still make jokes. She's still a part of our lives, my fiance and I, because we got her together and her sister at the same time. And Penny, her sister, her litter mate, went through grief. She
Yeah.
would wander around the
Yeah.
house and she would cry. And it was heartbreaking to hear her, like, where is Susan? Where's Susan?
Hmm.
And you could tell that
Oh.
she could sense that her sister was missing. And it added to our grief too. And it was hard. Like, I know. Pet grief is real and it's
Oh.
legit. And it's the same when a really deep friendship ends, especially when
Mhm.
you don't want it to. Even if you're the one who's instigating it, it's
Yeah.
hard.
Oh
And
yeah.
I'm a polyamorous person and I've lost other partners, and that relationship has brought up a lot of grief for me too.
Yeah.
So again, being the weirdo, the highly sensitive person who attaches to people and just cares about them
Yeah.
so much, or other creatures, there
Yeah.
are just so many different kinds of grief. And so if you're feeling that sense of loss, it's totally normal. And I love, love, love that you brought that up, because I think that that gets swept under the rug for most people.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I say that constantly on this show. Like whatever your loss is, it is yours and it is valid. I end
Mhm.
every show with your grief is valid. And because it is. And if it's, I lost my favorite hat, like you have that baseball cap you wear and it's somebody stole it or it's gone or whatever. Oh, you're allowed to grieve that. You are. Somebody might say you're weird and say it's just a hat. It's more than a hat to you.
Oh my
So,
gosh, that makes me think about technology. Like, think about how
Oh,
panicked we are when your
yeah.
phone falls into
Oh
the
my
toilet
God.
or the bathtub.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
It's hard. Yeah,
Because
it's hard.
we have so much of our lives on our technology, and you
It's
can
true.
even grieve inanimate objects, just like you said.
Yeah. I've had friends like there's all this stuff with Meta right now and all these issues, and they're using their AI to scrub things, and people are getting their accounts banned, and they're like, they're really up, they have to start new ones. It's like, I've lost all these friends from this, or now I've lost this and this. And some people might say it's just a stupid website, but it's more than that to them. That might be how they connect with people in the world. And yeah, technology is a big one. I'm still grieving the loss of the headset jack in my phone. I'm not going to get over that one.
I so relate to that.
I
And for
hate
instance,
Bluetooth. I hate Bluetooth.
I love Bluetooth, but I had the experience where one of my Bluetooth headphones was in a pocket and it went through the laundry. And now I only have one from that pair and I still wear it. And I will flip it to the other side and wear it upside down. So every time I wear it upside down, I think, I wish I hadn't lost that AirPod. This
I
is
don't blame you.
real.
You're not wrong. Your grief is valid, Stephanie. Your grief is valid.
It is. Oh my gosh. This is bringing up so much stuff for me, Nikki. Like, I
Telling
was
you.
a professional organizer and there was so much grief around people's
Oh,
possessions.
I can
And
imagine. Yeah.
oh my gosh, photos. Anytime someone had a house fire or their
Mhm.
basement flooded and they lost their photos and they only had one copy and there
Oh,
weren't any other copies that they could pull, sometimes you could salvage them, sometimes you can't.
mhm.
But there's that sense of history that you have attached to your belongings.
Yeah,
And when you
absolutely.
lose them, it can be really powerful. Or when you let go of them too, because that was
Mhm.
part of my job was helping people let go of them and to be
Yeah.
able to clear out space for things that they really loved instead of felt
Mhm.
obligation towards. And
Yeah.
it could be a really delicate process, but you can see people getting lighter on the other side.
Mhm. Yeah, and one of my guilty pleasures, I guess I shouldn't say guilty, it's totally okay for me too. I love watching hoarders. And it's so easy as somebody sitting back because I'm the opposite. I'm a minimalist. Like I have no problem letting go of things and try not to have a lot of stuff. And it's so easy for somebody like me to sit back and be like, just it's just stuff, but it's more than that to them. It's more than most of these people have a mental disorder or have had trauma surrounding their hoarding. And it's so easy to not see that. And even hoarding whatever grief aside, like it's hard to see people's grief and their traumas. You don't, and not everybody wears that on their sleeve. So,
Mhm. To your point, though, you can learn that, which I
mhm,
think is one of the most valuable skills that you teach your clients
mhm.
because people think, well, I just don't know how to handle grief, so I'm going to run away from it. But it's actually a muscle that you can strengthen. And just
Yeah.
because you don't know how to handle it now doesn't mean that you won't know how to handle it in future and be able to
Yeah.
help other people handle it too.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And that's what I tell people. It's you're gonna suffer subsequent losses. That's just how life works. Um, And I'm not saying that other losses will be easier, but you at least now understand what your feelings are. And when you understand what your feelings are and why you're feeling them, it makes it that much easier to work with them, you know.
Hmm. Yeah, they don't seem like this nebulous, scary shadow thing that's
Yeah,
lurking over you. You
yeah,
shine a light on it and you can see it clearly, and it just
yeah.
makes sense.
And then the next time it's there, you're like, okay, I know what this is. This is gonna stink. This is awful for a minute, but I know what this is now, and I know how to work with it. So, yay.
Hmm.
All right. Well, we're getting close to the end of the episode. Do you have anything else you would like to add before I get to my end of the show tradition? I have a tradition at the end of my show.
I love that. I know I've heard a lot of your episodes, so I'm excited. I think we covered it because you really struck a chord with me about non-traditional quote unquote grief. And it just felt really great to validate that for me. I feel like I learned something today
Yeah,
from you, in
yeah,
addition, that there are so many types of grief that even I hadn't thought about as a highly sensitive person. And when you feel deeply about things and you care about people, it doesn't matter how they feel about you, there's still some grief involved when the
yeah,
relationship changes or when
yeah,
it ends.
yeah. And that was, man, it took me like four therapists to finally understand that a lot of what I was going through was grief until somebody finally was like, do you know what disenfranchised grief is? And I was like, no. And she explained it. I'm like, oh, that's what's happening. So yeah, and after that, I'm like, everybody needs to know about this. All right. Well, we are getting toward the end now, so I'm going to pull our card from the death deck. I've been over here shuffling them. I'm going to shuffle again, and I'm going to hold them up here so everybody knows watching at home that I am pulling one at random. This always happens. I pick one I've read before, but that's okay. Oh, okay. This is a good one. Which of these phrases do you feel is the worst thing to say to someone after the death of a loved one? A, I know just how you feel. B, they're in a better place now. Or C, everything happens for a reason.
Be all of the above.
Yeah, that's good answer. Good answer. Yeah, that one, there needs to be a D, all of the above. So with that, then what's the worst thing, and you don't have to name names, what's the worst thing somebody has said to you after a loss? Or maybe you have heard said to someone else.
I think it's the myth that everything happens for a reason.
Hmm.
And the thing is, I say that with a caveat because I believe that there is a pattern and there are synchronicities in the world,
Hmm.
but I think that trying to solidify grief with a single statement, even if it's well-intentioned or even if it's true otherwise to you, I think it tends to make people feel like you're not hearing them.
Yeah.
So I think probably the best thing to say is just, I'm here for you. And maybe I don't know what this feels like for you, but I want to be here for all of it, whatever you
Yeah.
want to share or not share.
Yeah. Yes, and thank you. Again, this is why we get along so well. We know, we get it. So again, my answer would be D, but the worst thing to answer my own question, the worst thing somebody said to me, it was not for me, but I was at a funeral for somebody who had lost an infant, and someone was chatting with me. I don't even know who this person was, so I obviously can't name names, but they said, "Well, she can have another one at least." And I'm like, "Oh my God, what is wrong with you?" Why would
Wow.
you? And I'm like, I looked at her, I said, I hope you haven't said that to her. She's like, what? I was like, that is a horrible thing to say. And now I've mentioned before I'm on a board for a nonprofit that provides support for women who suffer these losses. And the stories I've heard of things these people have said to these women is just, if you don't know what to say, that's always, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. But if you don't know what to say, just say, I'm so sorry and walk away
Hmm.
before you say. I understand a lot of these are platitudes that come from a place of heart, like, oh, they're in a better place. They want you to feel better. But I can't think of any good reason to say that to a woman who's just had a loss like that. So anyway,
I agree. I mean, that makes it sound, I'm sure that wasn't how it was intended, but it makes it
yeah.
sound like, well, that human is replaceable. I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know, maybe, and here I'm trying to rationalize a horrible thing, but maybe they're just thinking that having a new baby will help ease their pain. But you can't, anyway, that's a whole podcast for a whole other day.
I was going to say you can add miscarriages
Mhm.
or SIDS or stillborns. Oh my God, I cannot even imagine. Talk about menopause, yet another topic about women that so many women face that nobody wants to talk about. Here's a whole
Yeah.
other podcast episode for you.
Thank you. I'll put that on my list. All right, Stephanie, this
You're
has been
welcome. Oh.
oh, uh, this has been great because you're great. So I'm going to give you a few minutes here. I want you to tell all my listeners everything about you, where they can find you, any projects or things you've got coming up, and your podcast as well.
Yes, I think the easiest thing is probably the podcast because Nikki has been on my podcast. And
Yay.
it was an amazing conversation full of dry humor and very heartfelt messages. So it was wonderful. The podcast is called Highly Sensitive Club, and it's a place for highly sensitive people to come and know that they are welcome and there are other people like them. So it is on Spotify, it's on Apple, it's on all the major podcasting apps. And in addition to podcasting and sharing all the great topics about high sensitivity that I love to talk about, I also coach one-on-one for anything in life that's related to health, relationships, wealth, your career, anything highly sensitive. I love working with my HSPs. So you can find me at Stephanie Linn, LINN.com, and you can book a call if you just want to chat and kind of get to know a little bit more about me. And I also, speaking of grief and feelings, have a program that opens twice a year called Emotional Alchemy, transforming overwhelm into connection and confidence. And it is about teaching highly sensitive people to not run away from your emotions, but to actually feel them, to tap into them, and then to use them and separate out your emotions from other people and your emotions from situations. It's a really, really powerful course, and it's only 6 weeks. So it's a really great foundation, and it gives you all kinds of tools that you can then grow into over time.
That's awesome. When's your next one? When's the next one?
The next one will be in the spring.
Okay.
So look out for that in early 2025.
Okay. I might sign up for that. All right. And I will put links to all her stuff down in the description of this podcast. So thank you, Stephanie. You're wonderful. Thank you so much for being on my show.
You are wonderful. I love our conversations. This just felt like a natural continuation of everything we normally talk about. And 100%. This was lovely. Thank you for having me.
Yay. All right. Thank you so much again to Stephanie for being on my show and talking so openly and vulnerably about life as a highly sensitive person. So hopefully you have a little more insight into what highly sensitive people are, how we act, and I'm including myself in that because I'm very much an HSP. And yeah, thank you again so much. And I will put links to all of her information in the show notes, her podcast, her socials, website, all that good stuff. So check there. And if you would like to reach out to me on my socials, you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, all at Nikki the Death Doula. I'd love to hear from you. Tell me what you think of the show. Even better, you can leave me a rating or review on whatever podcast platform you are listening on. That is the best way for more people to find me and for me to have more listeners, which would be nice. I just want to help people. I just want people to feel better about their grief. And the more people that can feel better about their grief, the better. I don't know. Anyway, you find me on all those socials. You can also find me on my website at nikkithedeathdoula.com. That is all for this week. Thank you so much for tuning in. And remember, as always, your grief is yours. Your feelings are valid. And grief doesn't always have to suck. Good Grief with Nikki the Death Doula is produced by Nikki Smith of Nikki the Death Doula LLC in Columbus, Ohio. Nikki the Death Doula LLC is for consulting, education, emotional support, and guidance, and is no way considered a funeral establishment or licensed mental health establishment. Scripts, editing, sound design, literally everything with this podcast is done solely by Nikki Smith of Nikki the Death Doula LLC, with the exception of the music. The music is Cheery Monday by Kevin MacLeod. Licensing information can be found at filmmusic.io.